Move along, Gramps. This event's for genuine servicemen. These harsh words cut through the winter air as the guards sneered at an elderly figure wrapped in a weathered military coat. Onlookers turned away uncomfortably. A few snickered quietly. The aging man offered no resistance, no complaints. He simply retreated into the bitter cold, holding a ceremonial flag protectively against his body. Moments thereafter, commanding footsteps rang across the polished stone. A high-ranking officer burst through the entrance, halted dramatically and roared, "Where's the veteran you just dishonored? If you value service over appearances, share your thoughts below." Walt Thompson had penciled this occasion into his planner months earlier, marking it with an unsteady hand. December 7th, Pearl Harbor Memorial Day, when the National Military Heritage Center would present its yearly commemoration, welcoming all former service members without charge. Now 87, Walt could no longer operate a vehicle. His vision had weakened, his grip trembled constantly, and his gait had become a cautious hobble. Yet his recollections stayed crystal clear, particularly regarding his military years: Korea in '52, Vietnam in '68. Those locations and moments were branded deeper into his spirit than any physical wounds. The trek from his residence demanded 3 separate transit connections, orchestrated with battlefield-like exactness. Walt awakened before sunrise, allocating sufficient time to buff his ancient combat footwear and iron his threadbare service jacket. The bronze medal attached to his chest reflected the early daylight as he examined himself in the mirror. His granddaughter had volunteered to transport him, but Walt had refused. "You have your own household to tend to," he'd responded kindly. Truthfully, he valued undertaking this pilgrimage independently. Certain journeys demanded solitude. The frigid December atmosphere penetrated his slender build as he reached the center's majestic entrance. Stone stairs ascended toward towering pillars, while banners declared, "Celebrating those who served, a distinguished tribute." Walt hesitated, regaining his breath before joining the queue of attendees before him. Families conversed enthusiastically. Multiple younger ex-servicemen in pristine uniforms passed effortlessly through security, each displaying military identification or VA documentation, earning appreciative acknowledgments from the sentry, a youth sporting closely trimmed hair and a disinterested demeanor. Upon reaching the checkpoint, Walt offered a friendly greeting. "Morning, young man." "Identification," the guard requested without raising his gaze. Walt's pleasant expression remained unchanged. "I fought in Korea and Vietnam, son. 38th Infantry Regiment in Korea, followed by Special Forces Advisory in Vietnam." The sentry finally glanced up, rapidly assessing Walt's lined face, quaking hands, and worn jacket. "Sir, we require legitimate documentation, military ID, VA card, or discharge documentation. We cannot simply permit anyone to claim veteran status." "I haven't possessed an ID in decades," Walt clarified patiently. "However, I brought this." He extracted a protected photograph, showing himself as a youthful soldier alongside his Korean War unit. The guard scarcely acknowledged it. "That could represent anybody. No identification, no admission. Those are our regulations." A woman in costly attire mumbled, "Typical. Another vagrant attempting to infiltrate for free benefits." Several others laughed quietly. The guard motioned for Walt to step away. "Sir, you must proceed elsewhere. Others are waiting." Walt didn't object. Dignity maintained his posture erect as he departed. No confrontation, no outburst, just serene self-respect as he descended the stairs, the wind slicing through his coat more fiercely now. The ceremonial flag he bore, the one that had covered his brother's casket following Korea, he gripped more firmly against his chest, shielding it from more than merely the weather. He failed to observe the elegantly attired woman across the avenue, monitoring the entire incident with narrowed eyes and a phone already against her ear. Within the center, the program continued as scheduled. The administrator delivered an eloquent address regarding sacrifice and obligation. A youth chorus performed patriotic melodies. Large monitors displayed a presentation featuring attractive young veterans discussing their service, interspersed with archived footage. "Today we celebrate those who face danger," the administrator announced to spirited applause. "Those courageous individuals who place duty before self." Meanwhile, outside, Walt occupied a frigid bench, awaiting the next transit. The flag stayed pressed in his grasp, a link to a sibling who never returned home, to fellow soldiers existing now solely in his memories. The contradiction wasn't lost on him. Behind those walls, people applauded an idealized version of veterans, pristine, heroic, conveniently presented for civilian appreciation, while he, with his shabby attire and unsteady hands, was considered too unseemly for their celebration. He'd witnessed this pattern previously, how America embraced its warriors conceptually, but frequently ignored them practically. It no longer infuriated him. Disillusionment had long since crystallized into silent acceptance. Across the metropolitan area in an unremarkable federal facility, Major Diana Stevens marched deliberately along a hallway, her heels tapping against gleaming floors. A military academy alumna with 2 decades of service, Stevens was someone who refused to tolerate unfairness, especially concerning veterans. She rapped once on a substantial wooden door before entering. "Sir, there's an incident at the National Military Heritage Center you should be aware of." General Robert Mason glanced up from his paperwork, 4 stars shining on his uniformed shoulders. At 62, Mason was legendary within military communities, a decorated battlefield commander, esteemed tactician, and passionate defender of those who served beneath him. "What type of incident, Major?" "I observed a veteran being refused entry to today's ceremony. Elderly gentleman, Korean and Vietnam eras, based on his jacket insignia. Security rejected him for lacking identification." Mason's demeanor grew dark. "Details." Stevens reported them systematically. The old soldier's composure, the guard's rejection, the bystander's ridicule. She understood the general sufficiently to detect the restrained rage accumulating behind his professional facade. "There's additional information, sir," she continued. "I had personnel investigate the name he provided. Walter Thompson." She positioned a file on Mason's desk. 38th Infantry Regiment in Korea, subsequently served with 5th Special Forces in Vietnam. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. General Mason opened the folder. Then he became motionless. "Thompson, Walter Thompson. You're certain?" "Affirmative, sir." Mason's finger followed a line in the documentation. Then he looked up, his expression transformed. "Cancel my appointments. Prepare my vehicle immediately. Major, this has become personal. Sergeant Walter Thompson rescued my father's life at Incheon, extracted him from a blazing tank while under hostile fire. Without that man's actions, I wouldn't exist today." Within minutes, a formation of dark federal vehicles raced toward the center, emergency lights active but sirens muted. Inside the primary vehicle, General Mason sat rigidly upright, his expression fixed in the stern resolve. The convoy approached the center's entrance with military precision. Personnel and visitors turned in astonishment as General Mason emerged, his uniform flawless, his presence demanding immediate attention. Inside, the ceremony progressed fully. The identical security guard who had dismissed Walt continued verifying credentials, still enforcing his arbitrary distinction between those deemed acceptable and those who weren't. He raised his eyes as heavy footsteps approached, his expression widening at the sight of a 4-star general advancing toward him. "Sir, welcome to—" "Where is he?" Mason's voice sliced through the surrounding sounds like steel. "Excuse me, sir. The veteran you dismissed, his location?" The guard swallowed nervously, suddenly realizing something had gone terribly wrong. There was an elderly individual without proper identification. But, "Move along, Gramps. This event's for genuine servicemen," General Mason quoted, his voice echoing across the marble entrance. "Those were your words, correct?" The center administrator, notified by the disturbance, rushed over. "General Mason, what an honor. Is there an issue?" Mason faced the administrator, his tone dangerously controlled. "The issue is that while you deliver speeches about celebrating veterans, Your staff refuses entry to actual heroes at the entrance. The assembled crowd grew silent. Journalists sensed a superior story developing and moved closer, cameras prepared. "Where's the man you just humiliated?" Mason demanded. "If you understand that genuine service bears scars, not suits, share your respect below." The center administrator paled, glancing between the imposing general and his suddenly anxious security guard. "There must be some confusion. We welcome all veterans with appropriate identification." "Appropriate identification," General Mason echoed, his words sharp with disdain. "Tell me, have you witnessed what occurs to military credentials after 6 decades? They discolor, they split, they disintegrate, just like the bodies of the men who carried them through combat." He turned to address the crowd, his voice resonating throughout the marble hall. "You had a Medal of Honor candidate standing outside your entrance, and you barred the door in his face." A collective intake echoed through the visitors. Mobile phones rose, recording the moment. "Walter Thompson," the general continued, his voice slightly breaking, "rescued my father's life at the Battle of Incheon. He pulled him from a burning tank while under enemy assault, sustaining severe burns to his own hands. My family owes its very existence to that man." The administrator's complexion had shifted from pale to gray. "General, I was unaware." "Naturally, you were unaware," Mason interrupted, "because you've transformed honoring veterans into a publicity event. Speeches, displays, and convenient heroes who match your vision of what service should represent." Major Stevens approached, speaking quietly into the general's ear. He nodded once, then instructed a junior officer, "Locate Mr. Thompson immediately." The center had become completely quiet. The ceremony in the primary hall had unofficially stopped as news of the confrontation spread. Visitors and staff remained motionless, many exchanging uncomfortable and ashamed glances. General Mason returned his attention to the administrator. "Do you understand why Walter Thompson wasn't displaying his complete decorations today? Why he wore only that single bronze star on his jacket?" The administrator shook his head silently. "Because his other medals are exhibited in his brother's residence. Lieutenant James Thompson died in action in Korea. Walt presented them to his brother's widow, explaining that they belonged to the genuine hero of the family." Mason's voice conveyed both anger and deep respect. "That's the caliber of man you just rejected." Outside, across the plaza, Walt sat on a bench covered with fine snow, still clutching the ceremonial flag. The bus was delayed, or perhaps he'd missed it during his contemplation. At his age, time occasionally escaped him. He glanced up at the sound of approaching footsteps. Crisp, measured steps he immediately recognized as military. A young officer in dress uniform halted before him, delivering a precise salute. "Mr. Thompson, General Mason requests your presence, sir." Walt blinked in surprise. "General Mason?" "Yes, sir. Please accompany me." Puzzled but curious, Walt permitted the officer to assist him to his feet. As they crossed the plaza, he noticed the black vehicles at the entrance, the small crowd gathering outside. At the top of the stairs stood a figure in full dress uniform, 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder. As Walt approached, the general stepped forward and rendered a sharp formal salute. "Master Sergeant Thompson," General Mason said, using Walt's highest rank, "I'm Robert Mason. My father was Lieutenant David Mason, 38th Infantry, September 15th, 1950. Walt's eyes widened in recognition. "Little Davy Mason's boy." A smile crossed his weathered features. "Well, I'll be. You've made your old man proud with those stars." "He ensured I knew your name, sir. Ensured I understood what true bravery looks like." Around them, a crowd had assembled, center staff, visitors, journalists, and the officers who had accompanied General Mason. One by one, the military personnel present stood at attention and saluted. Then civilians began demonstrating their respect as well, some placing hands over hearts, others bowing heads in acknowledgement. For the first time in decades, Walt Thompson stood at his full height, shoulders squared, not merely an old man in a worn jacket, but a soldier being recognized for who he truly was. "We have some unfinished business inside, Sergeant," General Mason said, offering his arm for support. There's a ceremony honoring veterans, and it's missing its guest of honor. Together, they ascended the steps and passed through the doors that had been closed to Walt just an hour earlier. The security guard stepped aside, eyes lowered. The center administrator began a stammered apology. General Mason silenced him with a glance. Save it. Instead, I recommend you listen carefully to what a genuine veteran has to say. Walt, for his part, absorbed it all with quiet dignity. As they entered the main hall, he leaned closer to the general. You didn't need to do all this, son, he said softly. With all due respect, Sergeant Thompson, Mason replied. Yes, I absolutely did. By the next morning, the story had become viral. Mobile phone recordings of General Mason's confrontation circulated extensively, as did photographs of Walt Thompson being escorted into the ceremony as its most honored guest. Major news organizations covered the story, discovering in it a compelling narrative about recognition, respect, and the often overlooked veterans among us. The center administrator resigned within 48 hours, claiming personal reasons but deceiving no one. The security guard was transferred after issuing a public apology. More importantly, the center's board announced a comprehensive revision of their veteran access policies, effective immediately. Their statement declared all self-identifying veterans will be welcomed with respect and dignity. Our personnel will receive specialized training in recognizing and honoring military service in all its forms, not merely through documentation and paperwork, but through understanding and compassion. Walt Thompson found himself reluctantly in the public eye. Interview requests flooded in, most of which he declined. I'm not the narrative, he maintained. There are thousands like me, just less visible. Nevertheless, his quiet dignity resonated nationwide. Veterans organizations reported increased public support. Assisted living facilities noted more volunteer applications. Educational institutions requested veteran speakers for special programs. The center itself established an entirely new section dedicated to the forgotten warriors, honoring veterans often overlooked due to age, appearance, or circumstances. Walt was invited to cut the ribbon at its inauguration, which he did with characteristic modesty. Most significant to Walt was the bench, a simple wooden seat installed near the center entrance, bearing a small bronze plaque reserved for those who served. It became an unspoken custom that no one, regardless of position, would sit there if a veteran was standing nearby. Every Sunday afternoon, weather permitting, Walt could be found near that bench, sometimes sitting quietly, other times sharing stories with younger veterans or inquisitive children. Not as a destitute-looking old man, but as a living connection to history, a guardian of memories that might otherwise vanish. And throughout the city, in silent salutes and small gestures of recognition, an important truth spread. You never know the struggles someone has endured just by observing them. And genuine respect means looking beyond appearances to honor the service within. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful tales of courage and dignity.